There's a moment in logistics where every professional involved in import and export dreads, and that is when the ship doesn't come in. When the goods you promised your clients are still floating somewhere in the Pacific or sitting in a port halfway across the world, owing to factors that are beyond your control. Believe me, it's in that moment that you realize that a single delay can leave you with so many worries and stress. Today, on Tales of Logistics, we are diving into real stories of supply chain failure. We're talking about global shocks to poor partnerships and also the hard lessons that were learned from this situation that occurred, because sometimes the best teacher in logistics is the most difficult experience that we have encountered. So let's start with the pandemic that occurred in 2020. Do you remember when you couldn't find toilet papers anywhere in all the groceries? Yep, that wasn't just because of the pandemic only or because of consumer panic. It was a happenstance that is called bullwhip effect of supply chain. And that pandemic bullwhip effect was a true frenzy. We're talking about long queues for almost all stores, as if, toilet paper has become the crucial new commodity of our very existence. Consumers overbought toilet papers, retailers overordered, suppliers overproduced toilet papers, and gradually the system collapsed under its own panic. Unfortunately, toilet paper wasn't the only commodity that experienced the bullwhip effect. We saw nose masks, hand sanitizers, semiconductors, PPEs, even baby formula all experienced the same effect. But what really stood out in that situation or that pandemic chaos is that overreaction going to final consumers is as dangerous as underplanning, regardless of the forecasting done prior. So now we're done with 2020. Let's move a bit further to 2021. In March 2021, where we experienced a global shock that hit the news headline globally. That month was where a 400-meter long container named the Ever Given wedged itself sideways in the Suez Canal. Not for hours, but for 6 painful days. 6 painful days, it froze global trade worth $9 billion per day. And the reason why it cost the globe $9 billion per day was because over 12% of all of the world shipping traffic ran through that canal. And suddenly, it was as if someone had unplugged the world economy. Yes, it was as if someone stepped on the flow of supply chain and completely disrupted it. It was chaotic. Manufacturers in Europe halted productions and broke deadlines because, raw materials are stuck on the way. And retailers in Africa and South America had to face empty shelves because everything has been bought out and they have nothing else to replace with. Contracts breached, freight rates, flying alternative routes skyrocketed overnight. And the biggest question that every professional back then during that situation was asking us, how? How did one ship bring global trade to its knees? The simple answer was overdependence. And that global shock on the Suez Canal showed that overdependence on a single critical route is a ticking time bomb. If your supply chain has one route, one canal, one port, one supplier, you truly don't have a supply chain. To be very honest, what you have is a single point of potential failure that is waiting to occur. Well, unfortunately, supply chain and deliveries disruptions are not usually caused by global disruptions like we saw in 2020 or with the Suez Canal of 2021. Sometimes it even starts quietly, like with a handshake or a contract a needless procrastination, or just a bad assumption. And if we have to still go back to the 2020-2021 pandemic, there were several cases where mid-tier Western brands, especially those involved or that trade apparel and consumer goods, suffered massive disruptions after outsourcing to third-party factories in Southeast Asia. See, these third parties that got the contracts from brands in Western world or in North America, then outsourced it to another contractor who also outsourced the contract to another contractor, creating a subcontracting chain that the brand itself that gave out that contract have no idea about anything going on at the back. They have no idea that the contractor they deal with to produce apparels or consumer goods has subcontracted the contract to another person who then gives it to another person, then to another person, then to another person. Thereby, this chain of subcontractors led to late shipments, poor quality, and sometimes even cancelled orders. See, it was so bad for the industry that it made front pages of the news and newspapers like Financial Times, Bloomberg. It made a headline. Let me give you an instance of what I'm trying to say in essence. Let's just take a company called Lumos Apparel. Say Lumos Apparel is a mid-sized Canadian sportswear brand, And then in 2019, they decided to cut costs by switching to a cheaper manufacturing partner in Vietnam, for instance. Now, the deal looks perfect on paper. Lower cost, faster turnaround, same quality promised. Awesome. Awesome until the pandemic hit. Lumos discovered that their partner in Vietnam does not own a single factory where it manufactures the apparel. Rather, that partner in Vietnam was subcontracting the production to another subcontractor who then subcontracts the contract to another subcontractor. And what was the outcome? Well, unfortunately, shipments to Canada were delayed for months. Quality became increasingly inconsistent, and customers of Lumos Apparel lost trust in the brand. The company or the brand had to recall over 15,000 defective units, and their reputation took a very, very bad hit that they never recovered from. The lesson from this situation is that in supply chain, transparency is very important. Transparency is literally everything. And most times, the cheaper partners can end up being the most expensive mistake. The best rule of business partnership is this, that I've seen, that I've read, and I've heard, is that it's not about finding the lowest bid. It's about finding the right partner who shares your standards, your ethics, and your visibility. Well, we're not done. There's more. There's more in 2025. This year has been a totally chaotic year for supply chain. It feels as if climate crisis came solely for global logistics. We've seen droughts in Panama Canal stalling container ships. We've seen floods in Bangladesh submerging warehouses. We've seen wildfires in California halting rail shipments. And then currently, we're hearing about Hurricane Melissa sweeping through the Caribbean islands. Each of these disasters reveals a deeper truth, that the planet isn't separate from our supply chain. No, the planet is our supply chain. And with all of these situations, companies that were once optimized purely for cost are now forced to optimize their resilience. Resilience to weather, resilience to climate changes, resilience to policy, and resilience to politics. The smartest players in the industries are now diversifying routes, they're now mapping climate risk, forecasting and reforecasting while investing in predictive analytics, because the future now belongs to those who plan for unpredictability. The failures in logistics are truly painful. It's painful to the manufacturers, it's painful to the whole supply chain network, and above all, it's also painful to the customers. But they are also the foundations of smarter systems. And what this episode has made us come to realize is that visibility, right partnerships, and adaptability are crucial in successful logistics. This is Tales of Logistics. I am your host, Odiche, reminding you that behind every global trade route, there is a story worth telling. See you next time for another excellent episode. And please subscribe and repost. Your support is always appreciated.